I'm live. Hello. Saturday. It looks like, if you can see, I can hear the thunder. The big fluffy rain clouds are coming in for Louisiana's afternoon summer shower. The good news is my tomatoes are amazing. My peppers are abundant. I don't know what to do with all these peppers. And the grass just grows. It's very green and lush here. It's been a really rainy summer, so not a lot of pool time. Uh, the whole day is just kind of cloudy and overcast, and you will hear that rumbling thunder in the background. So, welcome. What a good day to read. So, let's read. This book just cracks me up. It's just so worn. I don't know if you can see how it's just worn. It's been well loved. I've got bookmarks in it and annotations in it. So we are at the point that Lucy is off on her honeymoon with Charles Darnay, and Dr. Manette has gone back into his PTSD. He's kind of gone off again. Hazel, hello. I missed you guys. I didn't read a lot this week. So, chapter 19 is an opinion. So, we're still in. Hi, Dinah. I got your message early this morning. Girl, you're up and always on reading. I'm going to try and read this afternoon since it looks like a rain day is coming in. So, I don't read as much as you do, though. I'm so impressed with your reading. All right. An opinion is what this chapter is called. And we are still in England. Worn out by anxious watching, Mr. Lorry fell asleep at his post. On the 10th morning of his suspense, he was startled by the shining of the sun into the room where a heavy slumber had overtaken him when it was dark night. He rubbed his eyes and roused himself, but he doubted, when he had done so, whether he was not still asleep. For going to the door of the doctor's room and looking in, he perceived that the shoemaker's bench and tools were put aside again, and the doctor himself sat reading at the window. He was in his usual morning dress, and his face, which Mr. Lorry could distinctly see, though still very pale, was calmly studious and attentive. Kelly, I miss you. How are you? Even when he had satisfied himself that he was awake, Mr. Lorry felt giddily uncertain for some few moments whether the late shoemaking might not be a disturbed dream of his own. For did not his eyes show him his friend before him in his accustomed clothing and aspect, and employed as usual? And was there any sign within their range that the change of which he had so strong an impression had actually happened? It was but the inquiry of his first confusion and astonishment, the answer being obvious. If the impression were not produced by a real corresponding and sufficient cause, how came he, Jarvis Lorry, there? How came he to have fallen asleep in his clothes on the sofa in Dr. Manette's consulting room, and to be debating these points outside the doctor's bedroom door in the early morning? Within a few minutes, Miss Pross stood whispering at his side. If he had had any particle of doubt left, her talk would have necessarily resolved it. But he was by that time clear-headed and had none. He advised that they should let the time go by until their regular breakfast hour, and should then meet the doctor as if nothing unusual had occurred. If he had appeared to be in his customary state of mind, Mr. Lorry would then cautiously proceed to seek direction and guidance from the opinion he had seen. He had been, in his anxiety, so anxious to obtain. So they're trying to decide, is he okay or not? Is Dr. Manette okay or not? Miss Pross, submitting herself to his judgment, the scheme was worked out with care. Having abundance of time for his usual methodical toilet, like getting ready in the morning, Mr. Lorry presented himself at the breakfast hour in his usual white linen and with his usual neat leg. The doctor was summoned in the usual way and came to breakfast. So far as was possible to comprehend with him, let me try that sentence again. So far as it was possible to comprehend him without overstepping those delicate and gradual approaches which Mr. Lorry felt to be the only safe advance, he at first supposed that his daughter's marriage had taken place yesterday. So he's kind of come back to himself, but he's lost time. An incidental allusion, purposely thrown out to the day of the week and the day of the month, set him thinking and counting, and evidently made him uneasy. In all other respects, however, he was so composedly himself that Mr. Lorry determined to have the aid he sought, and that aid was his own. Therefore, when the breakfast was done and cleared away, and he and the doctor were left together, Mr. Lorry said feelingly, "My dear Manette, I'm anxious to have your opinion, in confidence, on a very curious case in which I'm deeply interested. That is to say, it is very curious to me, perhaps. To your better information, it may be less so." So he's decided he's going to ask Dr. Manette about like medical advice because he is a doctor. He knows Dr. Manette's confused, but he doesn't want to trigger him and make it worse. So he's trying to handle it very carefully. Glancing at his hands, which were discolored by his late work, the doctor looked troubled and listened attentively. He had already glanced at his hands more than once. So Dr. Manette knows something's going on, but he's like lost his time. He knows that his hands show signs of having worked on the shoes again, and he's like nervous, right? "Dr. Manette," said Mr. Lorry, touching him affectionately on the arm, "the case is the case of a particularly dear friend of mine. Pray give your mind to it and advise me well for his sake, and above all for his daughters. His daughters, my dear Manette." "If I understand," said the doctor in a subdued tone, "some mental shock?" "Yes." "Be explicit," said the doctor. "Spare no detail." Mr. Lorry saw that they understood one another and proceeded. So they're talking in code. It's like if you go to a friend to ask advice for yourself and you say, "I have this friend," right? It's that same thing. Lorry is saying, "I have this friend who's had a mental shock." Dr. Manette recognizes it's him, but to save his face, so to speak, they both agree to discuss it as a hypothetical case. Okay, so as no one's lost. I want to make sure you guys understand. "My dear Manette, it is the case of an old and prolonged shock of great acuteness and severity to the affections, the feelings, as you express it, to the mind. The mind. It is the case of a shock under which the sufferer was born not, one cannot say for how long, because I believe he cannot calculate the time himself, and there are no other means of getting at it. It is the case of a shock from which the sufferer recovered by a process that he cannot trace himself, as I once heard him publicly relate in a striking manner. It is the case of a shock from which he has recovered so completely as to be a highly intelligent man, capable of close application of mind and great exertion of body, and of constantly making fresh additions to his stock of knowledge, which was already very large. But unfortunately, there has been," he paused and took a deep breath, "a slight relapse." The doctor, in a low voice, asked, "Of how long duration? How long was the guy relapsed to his old ways?" 9 days and nights." Oh, the doctor is surprised. "How did it show itself?" "I infer," glancing at his hands again, "in the resumption of some old pursuit connected with the shock." "That is the fact." "Now, did you ever see him?" asked the doctor distinctly and collectedly, though in the same low voice. "Engaged in that pursuit originally?" "Once." "And when the relapse fell on him, was he in most respects or in all respects as he was then?" "I think in all respects." So the doctor saying, "Did you see him before when he was in prison or basically when he was in that original shock?" And of course, Lorry did. He remembered him in that upper room at not Defarge's. Yeah, Defarge's. Um, so he's like, "Was I like that?" But was he like that? And he's like, "Yeah, he was completely out of himself." "And when the relapse fell on him, was he in all respects?" Sorry, jumping there. "You spoke of his daughter. Does his daughter know of the relapse?" "No, it's been kept from her, and I hope will always be kept from her. It is known only to myself and to one other who may be trusted." The doctor grasped his hand and murmured, "That was very kind. That was very thoughtful." Mr. Lorry grasped his hand in return, and neither of the two spoke for a little while. "Now, my dear Manette," said Lorry at length, in his most considerate and most affectionate way, "I am a mere man of business and unfit to cope with such intricate and difficult matters. I do not possess the kind of information necessary. I do not possess the kind of intelligence. I want guiding. There is no man in this world on whom I could so rely for right guidance as on you. Tell me, how does this relapse come about? Is there danger of another? Could a repetition of it be prevented? How should a repetition be treated? How does it come about at all? What can I do for my friend? No man ever can have been more desirous in his heart to serve a friend than I am to serve mine, if I knew how. But I don't know how to originate in such a case. If your sagacity, knowledge, and experience could put me on the right track, I might be able to do so much. Unenlightened and undirected, I can do so little. Like he's saying, I don't know about how the brain works. I don't know how about the body. How the body works. I'm a businessman. I'm a banker. You're a doctor. Tell me what I should do to prevent this from happening again. If it does happen, what should I do during it? Tell me what you want done in this situation. But again, he's protected Dr. Manette's dignity by alluding to it as another person, hypothetical scenario. Pray discuss it with me. Pray enable me to see it a little bit more clearly and teach me how to be a little more useful. Dr. Manette sat meditating after these earnest words were spoken, and Mr. Lorry did not press him. I think it probable, said the doctor, breaking silence with an effort, that the relapse you have described, my dear friend, was not quite unforeseen by its subject. Was it dreaded by him? Mr. Lord ventured to ask. Very much. He said it with an involuntary shudder. So Dr. Manette saying, I knew it was coming and I didn't want it to come. You have no idea how much an apprehension weighs on the sufferer's mind and how difficult, how almost impossible it is for him to force himself to utter a word upon the topic that oppresses him. Would he, asked Mr. Lorry, be sensibly relieved if he could prevail upon himself to impart that secret brooding to anyone when it is on him? I think so. But it is, as I have told you, next to impossible. I even believe, in some cases, to be quite impossible. Now, said Mr. Lorry, gently laying his hand on the doctor's arm again, after a short silence on both sides, to what would you refer this attack? I believe, returned Dr. Manette, that there had been a strong and extraordinary revival of the train of thought and remembrance that was the first cause of the malady. Some intense associations of a most distressing nature were vividly recalled. Now remember, Darnay went in before the wedding and told the truth about his relationship to the Marquis, and we're now being told by Dr. Manette this triggered him because it associated him with what got him in trouble to begin with. Now, we as readers don't know. I do because I've read the story, but we as readers don't know what that connection is yet. But Dickens is making the connection for us as readers. So pay attention. Manette has just said the trigger was being told the truth about Darnay. That was too close to home. That reminded me of old traumas. It is probable that there had been a dread lurking in his mind that those associations would be recalled, say under certain circumstances, say on a particular occasion. He tried to prepare himself in vain. Perhaps the effort to prepare himself made him less able to bear it. Would he remember what took place in the relapse? Asked Mr. Lorry with natural hesitation. The doctor looked desolately round the room, shook his head, and answered in a low voice, not at all. Now, as to the future, hinted Mr. Lorry. As to the future, said the doctor, recovering firmness, I should have great hope. As it pleased heaven in its mercy to restore him so soon, I should have great hope. He, yielding under the pressure of a complicated something, long dreaded and long vaguely foreseen and contended against, and recovering after the cloud had burst and passed, I should hope that the worst was over. Well, that's good comfort. I am thankful, said Mr. Lorry. I am thankful, repeated the doctor, bending his head with reverence. There are 2 other points, said Mr. Lorry, on which I am anxious to be instructed. May I go on? You cannot do your friend a better service, the doctor gave him a hand. To the first, then. He is of a studious habit and unusually energetic. He applies himself with great ardor to the acquisition of professional knowledge, to the conducting of experiments, to many things. Now, does he do too much? like he's asking him, you're always working, you're always busy. Do you think that's triggering it? Should you relax more? And Dr. Manette says, I think not. It may be the character of his mind to be always in singular need of occupation. That may be, in part, natural to it, in part, the result of affliction. The less it was occupied with healthy things, the more it would be in danger of turning in the unhealthy direction. He may have observed himself and made the discovery. You are sure that he's not under too great a strain? I think I'm quite sure of it. My dear Manette, if he were overworked now, my dear Laurie, I doubt it I doubt if that could be easily. I can't read this sentence. I doubt if that could easily be. There has been a violent stress in one direction, and it needs a counterweight. Excuse me, as a persistent man of business, assuming for a moment that he was overworked, it would show itself in some renewal of this disorder? I do not think so. I do not think, said Dr. Manette with the firmness of self conviction, that anything but the one train of association would renew it. I think that henceforth, nothing but some extraordinary jarring of that cord could renew it. After what has happened, and after his recovery, I find it difficult to imagine any such violent sounding of that string again. I trust, and I almost believe, that the circumstances likely to renew it are exhausted. So I think the only thing that triggers me is this connection to my past. Hard work is not the problem. Me being tired is not the problem. I think that I won't get triggered again. He spoke with the diffidence of a man who knew how slight a thing would offset the delicate organization of the mind, and yet with the confidence of a man who had slowly won his assurance out of personal endurance and distress. It was not for his friend to abate that confidence. He professed himself more relieved and encouraged than he really was, and approached his second and last point. He felt it was the most difficult of all, but remembering his old Sunday morning conversation with Miss Pross, and remembering what he had seen for the last 9 days, he knew that he must face it. The occupation resumed under the influence of this passing affliction, so happily recovered from, said Mr. Lorry, clearing his throat. We will call blacksmith's work blacksmith's work. We will say, to put up a case and for the sake of illustration, that he had been used in his bad time to work in a little forge. So he's making up more of a hypothetical scenario. He's a blacksmith, not a shoemaker. We will say that he was unexpectedly found at his forge again. Is it not a pity that he should keep it by him? The doctor shaded his forehead with his hand and beat his foot nervously on the ground. He has always kept it by him, said Mr. Lorry, with an anxious look at his friend. Now, would it not be better that he should let it go? So he's saying the hypothetical guy always kept the equipment of the blacksmith near him. Is that wrong? Should we get rid of, because we know that the shoemaker's bench is there with him. He's asking, should we get rid of that? Instead of specifically asking directly about Dr. Manette, again, it's all this hypothetical situation. Still, the doctor, with shaded forehead, beat his foot nervously on the ground. You do not find it easy to advise me, said Mr. Lorry. I quite understand it to be a nice question, and yet I think, and there he shook his head and stopped. You see, said Dr. Manette, turning to him after an uneasy pause, it is very hard to explain, consistently, the innermost workings of a poor man's mind. He once, not a poor man, but like poor as in unfortunate. He once yearned so frightfully for that occupation, and it was so welcome when it came. No doubt it relieved his pain so much by substituting the perplexity of the fingers for the perplexity of the brain, and by substituting, as he became more practiced, the ingenuity of the hands for the ingenuity of the mental torture, that he was never been able to bear the thought of putting it quite out of his reach. Even now, when I believe he's more hopeful of himself than he's ever been, and even speaks of himself with a kind of confidence, the idea that he might need that old employment and not find it gives him a sudden sense of terror, like that which one may fancy strikes to the heart of a lost child. So he's saying, when I was so lost in prison and my mind was tortured with what about my family, what about my life, what about the future, he found comfort in keeping his hands busy working on that shoemaking. And his fear is if he were to snap again and go back into that former state and the tool bench wasn't there, he fears it would be too much for him to cope, that he wouldn't have something there to protect him and take care of him. I once knew someone who was trying to quit smoking, and the idea of never having a cigarette again overwhelmed him. So for decades, he kept a pack of cigarettes in his front pocket, didn't smoke it, but when I asked him about it, he said the idea of reaching for the cigarette and it not being there would send me into a panic, and I would start smoking for sure. But the idea of saying, oh, the cigarettes are there, I can smoke it later, and he just later just never came, that kept his brain satisfied. And that's the explanation Dr. Manette's giving about why he needs the shoemaker's tools near him. So this is the conversation they've had. He looked like his illustration as he raised his eyes to Mr. Lorry's face, but may not mind. I ask for information as a plodding man of business who only deals with such material objects as guineas, shillings, and banknotes. May not the retention of the thing involve the retention of the idea? And so Mr. Lorry pushes back a little bit, but doesn't the fact that the shoe tools are sitting right there, doesn't that kind of push him toward regression? And the answer is there was another silence. I didn't finish reading it. If the thing were gone, my dear Manette, might not the fear go with it? In short, is it not a concession to the misgiving to keep the forge? There was another silence. You see, too, said the doctor tremulously, it is such an old companion. It's comforting. I would not keep it, said Mr. Lorry, shaking his head for the gain and firmness as he saw the doctor disquieted. I would recommend him to sacrifice it. I only want your authority. I'm sure it does no good. Come, give me your authority, like a dear good man, for his daughter's sake, my dear Manette. Very strange to see what a struggle there was within him. In her name, then, let it be done. I sanction it. But I would not take it away while he was present. Let it be removed when he is not there. Let him miss his old companion after an absence. Mr. Lorry readily engaged for that. So Dr. Manette said, okay, take it away when I'm not around. You're right. I need it to be gone for my daughter's sake, and for her I'll do everything. But don't do it in front of me. Mr. Lorry readily engaged for that, and the conference was ended. They passed the day in the country, and the doctor was quite restored. On the 3 following days, he remained perfectly well, and on the 14th day, he went away to join Lucy and her husband. So when are they going to take the shoemaker's tools away while he's on vacation with Lucy on the honeymoon? Isn't that weird? The father went on the honeymoon. Different times, I guess. On the 3 following days, he remained perfectly well. And I already read that. The precaution that had been taken to account for his silence, Mr. Lorry had previously explained to him, and he had written to Lucy in accordance with it, and she had no suspicions. So remember, Lorry had told Lucy the dad was just away on business, and now he's back. So she never knows that he had this problem. On the night of the day on which he had left the house, Mr. Lorry went to his room with a chopper, saw, chisel, and hammer, attended by Miss Pross, carrying a light. There, with closed doors and in a mysterious and guilty manner, Mr. Lorry hacked the shoemaker's bench to pieces, while Miss Pross held the candle as if she were assisting at a murder, for which, indeed, in her grimness, she was no unsuitable figure. The burning of the body, previously reduced to pieces convenient for the purpose, was commenced without delay in the kitchen fire, and the tools, shoes, and leather were buried in the garden. So those of you in AP or that have a teacher that asks examples of personification, what was just personified? So he says, let's read that portion again. The burning of the body. What is the body? The body is the the shoemaker's bench, right? So we've personified the shoemaker's bench by making it a body. We burn it, we burn all the pieces and bury them. So we give human characteristics to this shoemaker's bench. So wicked do destruction and secrecy appear to honest minds that Mr. Lorry and Miss Pross, while engaged in the commission of their deed and the removal of its traces, almost felt and almost looked like accomplices in a horrible crime. So thanks, Kelly. You're right. It's like a funeral. And they feel guilty because they're doing this kind of sneaky thing. It tells us again about the character of Lorry and Pross, which is going to be important as we see the theme unfold of, good versus evil, honorable behavior versus selfish behavior, that sort of thing. All right. that is 24 minutes. Let's see what the notes in the back are. That was through page 186 in my book. So let's look at some just basic context plot questions. So the question, how does Mr. Lorry get advice from Dr. Manette about Dr. Manette? This is an interesting trick. Why do you think he didn't just ask Manette directly? I think generally we don't ask people things directly if it's a sensitive subject, and he didn't want to trigger Dr. Manette. So it creates a whole hypothetical scenario, which for readers, it kind of can get confusing. That's why I stopped and tried to guide you through it. But the answer that the book puts, Lorry pretends that he's talking about a third person. Both he and Manette realize who it is. And this allowed them to get both a personal and professional opinion from Dr. Manette. So that next question is after we haven't gotten to that. So let's go to characters and their motives. We haven't read that part yet. Social and historical setting. Why did the revolutionists attack the Bastille first? We haven't gotten there yet. Reading in depth. We haven't gotten to that part yet, so I'll have to come back to it. But we do have a few words. So we started on page 179. So words from allusion, ALLUSION. That is probably one of the more mixed up words I found as a teacher. Illusion, ILL. Ill is like a magician's trick. It's an illusion, ILL. So how can you remember that? Allusion is all information referencing literary devices, all allusion. Illusion, ILL, to allude to, right? That's exactly right, Kelly. But a lot of times students misspell the word or they get the two words confused. So I just want to make sure we understand the difference. And the definition of it is the four choices: deception, counting, denial, reference. I don't love these one-word definitions, but this one's pretty easy to get. So your allusion to the labors of Hercules was a wasted reference because your audience knew nothing about him. Well, in this case, the definition is in the example, so it's a reference. So anytime you allude to something, as Kelly said here, you're making reference to something. Why do authors do that? To make a connection of feeling or history that the reader can connect to and understand what the author wants you to understand instead of giving a whole big long story. You reference some commonly understood person or event to make that connection of the emotion. So if I'm saying, you're a good writer, but you're certainly no Shakespeare, everybody knows I've said you're not an extraordinary, you're not going to be published. So I'm alluding to Shakespeare, who it's commonly known Shakespeare is a world-renowned writer. And so that reference means you're okay, you're not fantastic. So I don't have to say it that way. I say it in a more literary way. And that's the use of allusions. Kelly, excellent observation. Or if the author is writing somewhere where there's a lot of repression, there's not a lot of freedom of expression, he can make this allusion that people can reference and understand, and he doesn't get, I think of, oh shoot, it went out of my mind, Kelly. The pilgrimage story, Canterbury Tales. Canterbury Tales was very much a case of that. The other danger of alluding as an author is if they make a really timely reference. Let's say if I alluded to, you're a good quarterback, but you're certainly no Joe Namath. So Joe Namath was a huge football player when I was a teenager. And I think most of you today wouldn't know Joe Namath. I could be wrong on that. But you have to be careful when you make an allusion that isn't still relevant, isn't still commonly known. It only works if it's a reference to something that people really understand. T.S. Eliot was an author that made a lot of allusions that didn't necessarily connect. Like when we read now, I think that's why younger generations really struggle with it, because we don't read all the classics that he alludes to in his works. So, good word, allusion. Malady. Let's see, I forgot what page this ends on. 186. 186. Malady. I'm afraid Jimmy is perfectly healthy and his malady is imaginary, brought on by the coming test in geometry. Now, if you've studied French, très mal, M-A-L, malady, mal is bad. So, and this reference is pretty easy to come by. So the choices are brain damage, illness, feeling of well-being, tale, T-A-L-E. So it's, you got it, Kelly, it's an illness. Diffidence, I always forget what diffidence means. There are some words I just don't use enough. Let's see if I can get it contextually. Terry's diffidence was shown in the way he became completely embarrassed in the presence of other people. So our choices are shyness, confidence, arrogance, terror. It's just not a word we use very much. So in that context, I'm going to say diffidence is shyness. So that is 7. And it's right, 7A. So diffidence is shyness. Do any of you guys use this word very often? Do you hear it used very often? It's just not a word. I mean, it doesn't mean it's not a well-known word just because I don't use it. But those are the kinds of words that sometimes you just recognize. I don't remember every vocabulary word out there. And one of the things as a teacher, I always try to tell students, when you've got a word that's new to you, try and figure out a way to work it into your next conversations in the next week. Try and get it in like 3 or 4 times so that it becomes a part of your own personal lexicon, your own personal dictionary usage. And then 8, oblivion. Many books written in the past 25 years have been consigned to oblivion, but a few will be long remembered. And we were just talking about that. Some allusions we're oblivious to them, right? So what do you think it means? Disrespect, forgetfulness, thoughtfulness, fame. So oblivion, many books written in the past 25 years have been consigned to oblivion, but a few will be long remembered. So forgetful. Yeah. Forgetfulness. So those are our words for today. Kelly, I love when you're here because you always engage and play along, and I miss chatting with you. We need to hop on Messenger and have a chat and get caught up. I hope all's well. We are having a stormy Saturday afternoon, so I'm probably going to read. I am feeling better. I don't have any real news to update anybody on. I hope you guys are well. I need to come up with a good poll to put in the community. I don't have any ideas in my mind. So if you're on Discord or you message me or you can put a comment below, if you've got a good question to ask the readers, put that there so I can, it's got to have a multiple choice. Put that there so we can engage and see what people are interested in, like maybe something about summer or summer reading, or summer really drops off. The readers really drop off. And this book, gosh, just takes me forever to get through it. And look, this is what we've read, and this is what we still need to read. So we're about halfway through, less than halfway. So I'm going to keep reading. Don't be diffident about putting a comment below. And if you have subscribed, ring the bell so you know when I come online. Those of you that joined me because I had said it in Discord, let me know if that's helpful. If you like when I say, hey, I'm going on to read, I usually give about 5 minutes notice is all though. So you can't really plan it. I hope you have a great Saturday. I don't think I have any plans tomorrow that will prevent me from reading. So hopefully I'll read again tomorrow. So as I always say, I will read to you next time. See ya. Dinah, thank you. I'm glad to know that. Talk to you guys later. See you.